It was a calm afternoon in Carmel, California. The ocean breeze carried a salty scent through the streets, and the town was as peaceful as ever. People walked their dogs, stopped by cafes, and admired the view of the distant waves. Among them was an older man, tall and lean, with silver hair and a quiet look in his eyes. He wasn't wearing anything fancy, just a plain jacket, a worn pair of jeans, and old boots that looked like they had seen many years of dust and work. Most people who saw him wouldn't have thought much of it. He looked like any ordinary man who had lived a full life and now preferred peace over attention. That man was Clint Eastwood. He had been living in the area for many years, ever since his film career slowed down. But fame was never something he wore loudly. He preferred quiet mornings, local diners, and familiar faces. Lately, though, he had been thinking of moving to a smaller, more private home. Something by the sea, where he could spend the rest of his years surrounded by calm waves and fresh air. So that afternoon, he decided to stop by a real estate office near Ocean Avenue. It was a modern-looking place with tall glass windows and bright posters of luxurious homes pinned on the walls. As Clint opened the door, a soft chime rang and a burst of cool air brushed against his face. Inside, the office looked polished, gleaming floors, shining desks, and neatly dressed agents tapping away at computers. He stepped in quietly, glancing around. No one noticed him at first. A young receptionist was busy answering calls, and two agents were discussing something near the corner. Clint stood patiently, not wanting to interrupt. After a minute, a woman in her mid-30s approached him with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was dressed in a sharp black suit, her hair perfectly tied, and her expression confident, almost too confident. "Good afternoon, sir," she said briskly, looking him up and down. "Can I help you with something?" Clint nodded slightly. "Yes, I was wondering if you could show me some listings. I'm looking for a place nearby, something quiet, maybe with an ocean view." The woman's smile froze for a second, then turned polite again. "Oh, I see. Well, our listings start at around $2 million for something simple, and go up quite a bit for ocean views. Are you planning to buy or just looking around?" Clint chuckled softly. "I'm planning to buy," he said simply. She tilted her head, clearly trying to gauge if he was serious. His clothes didn't match the image she had in mind of her usual wealthy clients who came in wearing designer suits and drove sleek cars. She couldn't tell who he was, and she assumed he wasn't anyone important. "Well," she said, glancing at the door, "those properties are in very high demand, and we usually schedule showings by appointment for serious buyers. Do you have proof of funds or pre-approval documents with you today?" Clint raised an eyebrow, still calm. "Not with me," he replied, "but I can take a look first and sort that out later." She let out a light, dismissive laugh. "I'm sure you understand, sir, we get a lot of people who just want to browse. Maybe I can show you something more within a modest range first. There's a small cottage about 15 minutes inland. Cozy place, good value." Clint smiled faintly. "I was hoping for something near the coast. I like the sound of the water." Her expression tightened. "Well," she said, tapping her nails against the counter, "the coastal properties start at $10 million, and they're usually purchased by, high-profile clients." Clint nodded again, taking in her tone. He wasn't offended, just quietly amused. He had met all kinds of people over the years, and he could tell when someone judged by appearances. He didn't bother correcting her. He simply said, "That's fine. I can come back when you have time to show me one." But before he could finish, she spoke again, her voice dripping with polite dismissal. "Honestly, sir, those homes move fast. Maybe it's better if you browse online first. Once you have a better idea of your budget, we can schedule a proper showing." There was a moment of silence between them. Clint looked at her and saw no malice in her eyes, just arrogance mixed with ignorance. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said more than words ever could. Then, softly, he said, "Thank you for your time," and turned to leave. As he reached for the door, another voice called out from behind the desks. "Wait, hold on a second." It was another agent, a man about Clint's age, though slightly younger, who had recognized the familiar face the moment he walked in. He stood up quickly and came forward. "Excuse me, sir," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I didn't realize that was you. It's an honor to meet you." Clint smiled and shook his hand. "Good to meet you too," he said. The younger agent glanced toward the woman who had brushed him off. She looked confused, her eyebrows drawn together. "You didn't tell me who you were," she blurted, her tone suddenly softer. Clint shrugged with that easy, unbothered grace that made him who he was. "Didn't think it mattered," he said. "I was just looking for a place." Her cheeks flushed. "Of course, I didn't mean—" But Clint cut her off gently. "Don't worry about it," he said kindly. "We all have our days." The older agent, now eager to help, asked Clint to wait a moment while he pulled up listings that matched his request. He printed out a few pages and laid them neatly on the counter. "Here are some oceanfront properties that just came up. I'd be happy to show you around any time today." Clint glanced through them and smiled. "That looks good. I appreciate it." As they spoke, the woman, still red-faced, stood quietly behind the desk, pretending to type something just to avoid the stares from her coworkers. She could feel the tension in the room, the silent judgment that came not from Clint but from everyone else who had seen what happened. Clint's calm demeanor only made it worse. He didn't show anger or pride. He didn't scold her or make a scene. His quietness carried more weight than any harsh word could. It was the kind of silence that made people reflect on themselves long after the moment had passed. Outside, as the two men prepared to head out to see one of the listings, Clint looked up at the sky. The sun was lower now, spreading soft light over the town. He took a deep breath of the ocean air. It felt good to be out, even if he had just been underestimated by someone who had no idea who he was. It wasn't the first time. Years in Hollywood had taught him that fame doesn't always follow you into ordinary life, and that was fine with him. He liked blending in. He liked being treated like a regular man, though it always revealed a lot about people. The agent who now accompanied him walked a few steps ahead, chatting politely about the property. "It's a nice place," he said, "private but close to town. You'll love the view. The owners are relocating, so it's priced fairly." Clint nodded. "Sounds perfect." They reached the car, and as they drove off, the office behind them slowly fell back into its usual rhythm. But for Amanda, the woman who had turned him away, nothing felt the same. She couldn't focus on her computer screen. Her mind kept replaying the moment she had dismissed him, the small smirk she'd given, and the way he had handled it, with complete grace. She felt embarrassed, not because she'd been caught, but because she had been wrong. The man she thought was just another time waster had actually been someone deeply respected, someone who had built an entire life out of hard work and quiet determination. Meanwhile, in the car, Clint sat back watching the coastline roll by. His eyes softened as he looked at the waves crashing against the rocks. He didn't hold any grudge against the woman. People made mistakes. What mattered was what they learned from them. He thought about how easy it was for people to make quick judgments these days, based on clothes, age, or appearances. Maybe that was why he liked keeping things simple. No need for fancy cars or flashy clothes, just peace, honesty, and a good stretch of land. When they arrived at the property, Clint stepped out and stood in front of the ocean. The breeze was cool, the air clear. The sound of the waves was steady, rhythmic, grounding. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. The agent beside him waited, unsure if he liked it or not. Finally, Clint turned to him with a small smile. "Feels right," he said. They toured the home together, a quiet, spacious place with wide windows that opened toward the sea. Everything about it spoke of calmness. Clint liked that. He could already imagine spending his mornings there, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with orange and gold, Clint made up his mind. "Let's move forward with this one," he said. "I think this might be it." The agent nodded happily, promising to handle the details. As they drove back, Clint thanked him for taking the time. "It's my pleasure," the agent said sincerely. "And I'm sorry about what happened back at the office." Clint smiled faintly. "Don't be," he replied. "People show you who they are if you let them talk long enough. That's not a bad thing. It just teaches you something about the world." The man nodded thoughtfully. Clint looked out the window again at the last light of day shimmering over the water. There was something peaceful in knowing that life had its way of revealing truth. Without shouting. Without anger. Just quietly, like the tide coming in. Back at the real estate office, Amanda sat at her desk long after everyone had gone home. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, her thoughts heavy. She realized how quickly she had judged someone based on nothing more than clothes and first impressions. For someone who worked in an industry built on appearances, she had FE. The next morning, the sun rose quietly over the calm waters of Carmel Bay. Light spilled through the windows of Clint's home, touching the wooden floors and the framed photos that told the story of his long life. He was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, a habit he had never outgrown. There was something about quiet mornings that he loved, the stillness, the time to think before the day began. He was thinking about the house he had seen the day before. It wasn't flashy or grand. It was simple, elegant, and peaceful. The kind of place that held warmth instead of luxury. He had liked it more than he expected, but his mind also went back to the moment in that real estate office. The woman's dismissive tone, her forced smile, and how quickly she had judged him. He didn't hold it against her. Everyone makes mistakes, he thought. But still, something about that moment had stuck with him. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded him of how often people misjudge others. He'd seen it his whole life, both in Hollywood and outside it. After breakfast, Clint called the agent who had shown him the property. They planned to meet that afternoon to finalize some paperwork and discuss the purchase. Clint wanted to move quickly. He wasn't one for delays. Meanwhile, at the real estate office across town, the woman who had dismissed him, Amanda, was sitting at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. She hadn't slept well. The image of Clint's face, calm and polite despite her attitude, kept replaying in her mind. The moment her colleague had whispered his name, she had felt her stomach drop. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone did. But in that moment, she hadn't seen Clint Eastwood, the legend. She had just seen an old man in a jacket who didn't look like he belonged in a luxury office. Now, sitting in the quiet morning air of the office, she felt a weight of embarrassment pressing down on her. Every time the door opened and a client walked in, she straightened up a little too quickly, trying to look busy, trying to shake off the shame that clung to her. Her coworker, the man who had helped Clint, passed by her desk. "Morning," he said casually. She nodded but avoided his eyes. "Morning," she murmured. He hesitated for a moment. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said too quickly. He gave her a knowing look but didn't press further. Instead, he said, "You know, Clint really liked that oceanfront property. He's coming back today to sign the paperwork." Amanda froze. "He's buying it?" "Looks like it," the man said with a small smile. Didn't take him long to decide. "I guess when you've seen the world, you know what feels right." Amanda forced a small smile in return, but her mind was spinning. He was actually buying one of their most expensive listings, and she had treated him like he didn't even belong there. She couldn't stop replaying every word she had said to him, every dismissive glance. She could almost hear her own voice in her head saying, "Maybe we can find something more in your range." The words now made her cringe. By noon, the office was busier. Clients came and went, phones rang, and papers shuffled across desks. But Amanda's mind was elsewhere. She kept glancing toward the door, half hoping and half dreading that Clint might walk in again. She wanted to apologize, but she didn't know if it would make any difference. People like him had probably seen this kind of thing all their lives. When Clint finally arrived, he came in quietly, just like before. This time, though, everyone in the office noticed. The receptionist greeted him warmly, offering coffee and a seat. Even the agents who hadn't spoken to him before looked up with polite smiles. There was a subtle buzz in the air, a mix of curiosity and respect. Amanda's heart raced when she saw him. For a moment she considered walking over, but her feet wouldn't move. She watched as the other agent shook Clint's hand and guided him toward one of the glass meeting rooms. From her desk she could see them talking through the transparent wall. Clint's face was calm as always, his gestures small and steady. Every now and then, he smiled slightly at something the agent said. He didn't look angry or proud, just peaceful, content even. That made it worse somehow. If he had yelled, she might have felt less guilty. But his quietness, his grace, made her shame sharper. She thought about how she had ended up in this job. When she started, she had been passionate about helping people find homes. But as the years passed, she got used to dealing with big clients. The rich ones, the glamorous ones who wanted attention. Somewhere along the way, she had started seeing people as numbers and appearances instead of human beings. And now it had come back to remind her what she'd lost. Clint and the other agent stayed in the meeting room for about half an hour. Then they both stood, shook hands again, and walked out. Clint thanked the office manager on his way to the door. Everyone greeted him with warm smiles, trying to make up for what had happened before. Just as he was about to step outside, Amanda stood up. Her heart was pounding, but she couldn't let him leave without saying something. "Sir, excuse me," she called out softly. Clint turned, that same calm expression on his face. "I just wanted to say," she paused, searching for words that didn't sound rehearsed. "I owe you an apology. I misjudged you the other day. I was rude and I shouldn't have been. I'm really sorry." There was silence for a moment. The office had grown unusually quiet. Even the background chatter seemed to fade. Clint looked at her for a long second, not with anger but with a kind of thoughtful patience. He finally nodded. "Takes a good person to admit that," he said kindly. Amanda let out a shaky breath. "I appreciate that," she said. "I was completely out of line. I've been thinking about it ever since." Clint smiled a little. "Well, don't be too hard on yourself," he said. "We all make quick judgments sometimes. The trick is not to let them stick." She nodded, grateful for his grace. "I'll remember that," she said quietly. He gave her one last polite nod, then tipped his head slightly toward the door. "You have a good day," he said. "You too," she replied, her voice softer than before. As he left, the office manager glanced toward her and gave a small, approving smile. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small bit of peace. That afternoon, Clint drove back toward the oceanfront property he had chosen. The air was crisp, the sky a clear blue. When he parked in front of the house, he stepped out and stood for a moment, taking in the view. The waves rolled in and broke gently against the rocks. The sound was steady, timeless. The agent joined him, carrying a folder with documents. "Everything's ready," he said. "You can sign today if you want." Clint nodded and signed the papers on the hood of the car, the wind tugging gently at the corners of the pages. "I think this will be a good place," he said with quiet certainty. "I'm glad," the agent replied. "It's a special home." They shook hands again, and for a few minutes they just stood there watching the ocean. Back in town, Amanda couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. His words had stuck with her. The trick is not to let them stick. It wasn't just advice, it was something she felt she needed to live by now. After work, she sat in her car for a long time before driving home. The world outside looked different somehow. The same streets she drove every day now seemed quieter, more reflective. She realized how much she had let pride and assumption shape her actions. She had spent years trying to impress clients with luxury listings and polished talk, forgetting the real reason she had joined this business, to help people find a home, not just sell one. Over the next few days, word spread through the small real estate community that Clint Eastwood had bought one of the oceanfront properties through their office. Some people talked about the price, others about the lucky agent who got the commission. But what Amanda remembered most wasn't the sale, it was his composure. The way he handled disrespect with calm dignity. It changed the way she approached her work. She started paying more attention to every person who walked through the door. She stopped judging clients by their clothes or how they spoke. Instead, she listened, really listened. A few weeks later, Clint came by the office again, this time to drop off a few final documents. Amanda saw him from across the room and hesitated. She wondered if he'd even remember her. When he spotted her, he gave a small nod of recognition. "How are you?" he asked simply. "I'm doing better," she said truthfully. "Thanks to you," he smiled slightly. "Good," he said. "Keep it that way." They talked for a few minutes, small things, nothing deep. But there was a quiet understanding between them. She thanked him again before he left, and he accepted it with that same calm ease that had first made her rethink everything. When he finally walked out the door, she felt something like peace settle over her. For the first time in years, she felt like she had learned something real, not from a seminar or a book, but from an honest human moment. Meanwhile, at his new home by the ocean, Clint unpacked a few things, brewed another cup of coffee, and sat by the window. The waves were crashing softly outside, and the golden light of late afternoon filled the room. He smiled to himself, thinking about how small moments often carry the biggest lessons. People reveal who they are when no one's watching. And sometimes the best way to teach is not through anger or pride, but through patience and quiet grace. As the sun sank lower, Clint leaned back and let the peaceful rhythm of the sea fill the silence. Somewhere across town, a young woman sat at her desk looking out her own window, feeling the same calm sense of gratitude. Two very different people, A week had passed since Clint moved into his new home by the ocean. The house sat quietly on a small rise overlooking the coast, surrounded by pine trees that swayed with the wind. From his porch he could see the horizon stretching endlessly, the waves breaking in a rhythm that never changed. It was peaceful, calm, and everything he had wanted. Most mornings he woke early. He'd brew his coffee, step outside, and sit on the old wooden chair that faced the sea. The air smelled of salt and pine. Sometimes he'd watch seagulls drift above the waves. Other times he'd simply sit in silence, lost in thought. He didn't need much to feel content, just the sound of nature and the space to breathe. But Clint wasn't the kind of man to sit still for long. Even in his later years, he kept busy. He liked to fix things around the house, polish the wood panels, and walk down the winding trail that led to the beach. He greeted neighbors when he passed them, though most of them didn't realize who he was. And that was exactly how he liked it. One afternoon, while walking through town to pick up a few supplies, Clint stopped by a small cafe. It was the kind of place where locals gathered every morning, and everyone knew each other by name. When he walked in, the owner greeted him warmly. "Good afternoon, sir," she said. "Haven't seen you around much. New in town?" Clint smiled. "Not exactly new," he said. "Just moved back." She poured him a cup of coffee and said, "Well, welcome back. Carmel's a good place to be." As he sat down near the window, a couple of men at the next table started talking about the new property sale by the ocean. "Did you hear about that place that sold last week?" one said. "The one near Pebble Beach? Apparently, Clint Eastwood bought it." His friend laughed. "Come on, that can't be true. Why would he buy another house here?" Clint chuckled quietly, taking a sip of his coffee. He didn't say a word. He'd heard this kind of talk before, and it always amused him how people discussed him like a rumor, not realizing he was right there. After finishing his drink, he paid and left a generous tip before heading back toward his truck. On the way, a couple of people recognized him and waved politely. He waved back with a smile. Fame had never been something he chased, but he understood it came with the life he had chosen long ago. Still, he valued the moments where he could simply be the quiet old man by the sea. That evening, back at the real estate office, Amanda was working late again. She'd changed a lot in just a week. Her colleagues had noticed it too. She was softer now, more patient with clients, and far more attentive. Instead of brushing people off based on appearances, she made a point to listen, to understand what they were looking for before judging their situation. But deep down, she still thought about Clint from time to time. His calmness, his kindness after being disrespected had left a mark on her. She wished she could see him again, not as a client, but as someone she could thank properly, maybe even learn from. That opportunity came sooner than she expected. The office received a call the next morning from Clint's assistant, asking about a nearby piece of land. Clint wanted to buy it to extend his property, ensuring the space stayed quiet and natural. The call was transferred to Amanda by chance. When she heard his name, her heart skipped. She quickly pulled up the information on her screen and said she'd be happy to arrange a meeting. Later that afternoon, Clint walked into the same office once again. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. Everyone greeted him with warm smiles. Even the receptionist offered him coffee. Amanda stood up as soon as he entered. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her voice calm but a little nervous. He smiled gently. "Good to see you again," he said. "Likewise," she replied. "I hope you've been settling in well." "I have," he said. "Beautiful place, peaceful, just how I like it." She nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. You mentioned some interest in the land next to your property." "Yes," Clint said. "I'd like to keep it natural, no construction, no noise. Just trees and quiet." Amanda admired the thought. Most buyers wanted to build, expand, or flip, but Clint just wanted peace. "That's a wonderful idea," she said honestly. "Let me show you the details." They sat down together at her desk. This time she treated him with the same care she gave every client, maybe even more. She explained everything clearly, answered his questions, and didn't once rush him. Her voice was steady, her tone respectful but genuine. Clint could sense the change. He didn't mention it, but he noticed. There was no pretense in her now, no arrogance, just humility and sincerity. It was a quiet transformation, but one that spoke volumes. After discussing the property, Clint stood up and extended his hand. "You've come a long way in a short time," he said kindly. She looked surprised. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've been trying to be better at what I do," he smiled. That's all any of us can do." There was a pause, comfortable and calm. Then she said, "Would you like me to handle the paperwork for this purchase?" "That would be great," Clint replied. Over the next few days, Amanda handled everything personally. She called the county office, coordinated with the sellers, and made sure all the legal documents were ready. She didn't delegate it to anyone else. She wanted to do this right, not for her reputation, but because it felt right. When everything was ready, Clint came back one final time to sign the documents. Afterward, Amanda handed him the finalized papers and said, "It's all yours now. No one will build there." Clint nodded. "Thank you," he said. "You did a good job." She smiled, this time a real one. "I appreciate that more than you know." He hesitated, then said, "You remind me of someone I used to work with. Started off thinking too fast, learned to slow down, and became one of the best people on my team." Her eyes softened. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness," Clint said simply. "It's truth." As he turned to leave, Amanda felt a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and gratitude. She had gone from judging him to learning from him, and it had changed how she saw everything. Not just her job, but people in general. That evening, she went home and wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done in years. She wrote about the importance of kindness, humility, and never assuming someone's worth by their appearance. She even wrote Clint's words, "The trick is not to let them stick." Meanwhile, at his new home, Clint spent the evening walking along the beach. The tide was low and the sand felt cool beneath his boots. The sound of the waves was steady, and in the fading light the sea looked endless. He thought about the real estate agent who had changed her ways. It reminded him that sometimes people just need one honest moment to wake up and see things differently. He had spent his life learning that lesson too. In the film industry and politics, in his personal life, he had seen people rise and fall because of pride or ego. The ones who lasted were those who listened, stayed grounded, and treated others with respect. The next morning, Amanda received a small envelope at the office addressed to her. There was no return address, just her name written neatly. Inside was a simple note that read, "Thank you for helping with the land. You're doing fine. Keep going." It was signed simply, C.E. Amanda smiled as she read it. It wasn't fancy or long, but it meant more than any professional award or compliment she'd ever received. It was real. Over the next few weeks, Amanda carried herself differently. She laughed more, treated people kindly, and took time to help new agents in the office. Her coworkers noticed the change, and even clients commented on her warmth and patience. She didn't tell them what had happened. Some things, she felt, were better kept in the heart. Clint, on the other hand, continued his quiet life by the sea. Some days he met with friends, other days he walked the cliffs alone, his mind full of old stories and new thoughts. People occasionally recognized him and stopped to talk. He never turned them away. He'd smile, shake hands, and share a few words before moving on. One afternoon, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, the wind carried the faint laughter of children playing somewhere down the beach. He smiled to himself, thinking about how life kept moving, always teaching, always changing. He didn't need to be in the spotlight anymore. He had lived enough to know that the greatest moments often came quietly, when no cameras were around, when no one was performing. Like that day in the real estate office, when a small act of patience turned into a lesson for someone who needed it. And as the light faded, Clint leaned back, the waves rolling softly below, feeling that deep sense of peace that only comes from knowing you've made a difference, without even trying to. Sometimes, he thought, people talk too much about success, fame, and power, but the truth was simpler. What really mattered were the moments of kindness that left lasting marks on other hearts. As night settled in and the stars began to appear, Clint finished his coffee, smiled quietly, and whispered to himself, "Not bad for a day's work." The ocean roared softly in agreement. When Clint walked out of the office that day, the air felt different. The quiet murmur from the lobby had turned into a low buzz. People were whispering, looking at him with a mix of surprise and guilt. He could sense what had happened. Someone must have told the young woman who he really was. Clint didn't need to turn back to know her face was probably pale now, her confidence gone. He adjusted his hat, took a slow breath, and smiled to himself. He had lived long enough to see how quickly people's behavior could change once they realized who they were dealing with. It wasn't new to him. Fame had followed him for decades, but he never cared much for it. What mattered to him was how people acted when they didn't know who he was. That always revealed more truth than any title or reputation ever could. Inside the office, the agent stood frozen near her desk. Her co-worker had leaned over and whispered the truth a few moments ago, and she had felt her stomach drop. Clint Eastwood. The name echoed in her head like a bell. The same man she had brushed off, the one she had barely looked at, was not only one of the most respected figures in the country, but had once been the mayor of the very town she worked in. She replayed every word she'd said to him. The way she had smiled smugly, the way she had dismissed his request, how she'd told him that maybe they should look at something more in his range. Every detail now burned with embarrassment. The realization stung deeply, not because of his fame, but because of how cruel and shallow she had been without even noticing it. Clint, meanwhile, had decided not to leave just yet. He stepped back inside the building, not out of pride, but out of calm curiosity. He wanted to see how the people around him would react now that they knew. The moment he re-entered, the atmosphere shifted. The receptionist straightened in her seat. Another agent quickly stood up, smiling a bit too widely. Even the manager, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, came rushing out of his office, hand extended and voice full of warmth. "Mr. Eastwood, what an honor to have you here, sir. Please come in. If only I'd known—" Clint raised a hand and gave a gentle nod. "No need for that," he said softly. "I was just looking around for a quiet place by the ocean. I thought I'd stop by." His tone was calm without a trace of anger, but there was something about the way he spoke, steady, grounded, that made everyone in the room fall silent. The young agent, who had been hiding behind her desk, finally stepped forward. Her confidence was gone. Her voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Eastwood, I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you. I thought—" Clint turned to her. His eyes, though aged, still carried that same sharp look that could pierce right through a person, yet his expression wasn't harsh. It was thoughtful, almost kind. "You thought I wasn't worth your time," he finished gently. The words hit harder than any scolding could have. She opened her mouth but couldn't form a reply. Her eyes welled slightly and she swallowed hard. Clint didn't raise his voice or act offended. He didn't need to. His calmness was powerful enough. "You see," he continued, "I came here to find someone honest, someone who'd treat me the same way they treat everyone else. That's all I was looking for." The entire office grew quiet. Even the clicking of keyboards stopped. Everyone was listening now. The manager looked uncomfortable, while the other agents stared at their desks, pretending to be busy. Clint adjusted his hat again and gave a small, knowing smile. "You never really know who's walking through your door," he added softly. "But kindness doesn't cost much, does it?" The young woman lowered her gaze, too ashamed to meet his eyes. Her face turned red. It wasn't the embarrassment of being caught. It was the deeper shame of realizing she had judged a person unfairly. The manager quickly tried to smooth things over, apologizing on behalf of the agency, offering coffee, and promising Clint the best service possible. He asked if Clint would still like to see the properties he'd mentioned earlier. Clint looked toward another agent, a quiet man in the corner who had smiled politely at him earlier. Even when the others ignored him, Clint pointed slightly in his direction. "I think I'll go with him," he said. The man's eyes widened, surprised but grateful. The manager nodded quickly, forcing a smile, while the young woman who had insulted Clint looked down again, her pride completely gone. As Clint followed the new agent out, the room stayed silent. Everyone watched him leave and a few exchanged uneasy glances. The young woman sat down at her desk and stared blankly at her computer screen. She could feel the weight of her mistake pressing on her chest. Out in the parking lot, Clint walked slowly beside the new agent. The air was crisp and the sky was a soft blue. The younger man, clearly nervous but respectful, asked gently, "Sir, I just want to say I've admired your work for years." "It's an honor to meet you." Clint smiled faintly. "Thank you," he said. "But you don't have to treat me any different than anyone else. I'm just a man looking for a place to live." "That's all?" The agent nodded. "Yes, sir." They drove off to see the Ocean View homes, leaving behind an office full of awkward silence and reflection. Back inside, the young woman couldn't focus on her work. Her hands were shaking slightly. Every word Clint had said kept echoing in her mind. She thought about how quickly she had judged him, how she had smiled politely but spoke with that tone that said, "You don't belong here." It wasn't just about Clint. It was about how she treated people in general. She had built a habit of sizing up clients by how they looked, what they wore, how they spoke. She realized that somewhere along the way, she had forgotten why she became an agent in the first place. She used to enjoy meeting people, hearing their stories, finding them homes that made them happy. But over time, she had become focused on commission, status, and appearances. That day, Clint had held up a mirror, and she didn't like what she saw. A few hours later, when Clint returned to the office to sign some preliminary papers with the other agent, the young woman was still there. She hesitated, then gathered her courage and approached him slowly. "Mr. Eastwood," she said softly, "I just wanted to say I'm truly sorry for how I treated you earlier. I was wrong. There's no excuse for that." Clint looked up from the paper he was signing. He studied her face for a moment, then gave a small nod. "It takes guts to admit that," he said quietly. "Most people don't." She nodded, her voice trembling a little. "I've learned something today," she said. "Something I won't forget." Clint gave a faint smile. "That's good," he said. "Every mistake's worth something if you learn from it." There was no bitterness in his tone, no pride, just calm wisdom. He returned to his paperwork as if nothing had happened. But those few words, now simple and kind, stayed with her. When Clint finally left that day, the entire office seemed quieter. The young woman sat at her desk feeling changed. For the first time in a long while, she saw her job differently. It wasn't just about selling houses. It was about how she treated people, no matter who they were. Clint, on the other hand, drove away toward the ocean. His window rolled down, the wind brushing against his face. He had seen the world at its best and worst, and moments like this didn't surprise him anymore. People judged too quickly, but he had learned not to take it personally. Life had a way of revealing the truth sooner or later. That evening, as the sun began to set, the light turned golden across the water. Clint parked his car near the cliffs and looked out at the sea. He felt at peace. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The quiet, the open horizon, that was what he came for. Meanwhile, back at the real estate office, the young woman opened her email and began typing a message. She hesitated before hitting send, carefully choosing her words. "Dear Mr. Eastwood," she wrote, "I wanted to thank you for your patience and kindness today. I made a big mistake in judging you, and I'm truly sorry. You reminded me what respect really means. I'll carry that lesson with me." She pressed send, exhaled, and leaned back in her chair. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. Across town, Clint's phone buzzed quietly on the passenger seat. He glanced at the message, read it once, and smiled. Then he looked back toward the ocean, calm and unbothered, and whispered to himself, "People change when they're given the chance." The next morning, when he came back to finalize some paperwork, the office atmosphere was completely different. The young woman greeted him politely, genuinely this time. The other staff seemed softer, more respectful to everyone who walked in. It was as if that one moment had reminded them all to slow down and be kind. Clint didn't stay long. He shook hands with the manager, thanked the other agent who had helped him, and prepared to leave. Before walking out, he turned to the young woman one last time. "Keep doing your job," he said kindly. "Just remember, every person who walks in here is someone's story. Don't miss it because you're too busy looking at their shoes." She smiled weakly, nodded, and said, "I won't forget." As Clint stepped outside into the sunlight, the cool breeze brushed past him again. The town was quiet. The ocean air carried a faint salt scent, and the world seemed as peaceful as ever. He took a deep breath and walked toward his car, knowing that somewhere behind him a small but real change had taken place. And for Clint, that was enough. The morning sun rose slowly over Carmel, spilling light across the cliffs and the ocean below. The waves glimmered in the soft light, rolling steadily onto the beach. Clint Eastwood sat on the porch of his new home, a cup of coffee warming his hands. He could hear the quiet hum of the town waking up, the distant bark of a dog, the faint chatter of people walking by, and the soft whistle of the wind through the trees. It had been weeks since the encounter at the real estate office. The woman who had dismissed him initially had changed. Her behavior, small as it was, reflected something deeper. She had learned humility and respect. It was a subtle but meaningful victory, one Clint didn't dwell on but quietly appreciated. He believed in small lessons, the ones that ripple outward and affect more than just one moment. Clint had spent the last few weeks settling into his home. It wasn't large or ostentatious, but it had everything he wanted: quiet rooms, tall windows overlooking the ocean, and the natural beauty of the cliffs nearby. Some days he spent hours just walking the edge of the beach, listening to the waves. Other times he worked on small projects around the house, fixing a broken fence, trimming the overgrown bushes, or painting a door. Each task grounded him. They reminded him of a simple truth he had lived by for decades. Life was best measured in moments, not fame or recognition. One morning, he decided to take a longer walk along the cliffs than usual. The path was winding, lined with pine trees and wildflowers that leaned toward the sunlight. As he walked, he noticed a few local residents waving at him. Some recognized him immediately, others after a moment's pause. He smiled politely at everyone, nodding or raising a hand in greeting. Most of them didn't know the story of how he had been underestimated or the small victories in the office, and that was fine. Clint never sought attention. He preferred to move quietly through life, letting actions speak louder than words. Back in the real estate office, the young woman, Amanda, had grown more confident in her own way. Her demeanor had shifted from arrogance to attentiveness, and her colleagues had noticed. She approached each client differently now, listening first and judging last. The lessons from her encounter with Clint Eastwood had stayed with her. It wasn't just about treating someone famous with respect. It was about treating every person with the dignity they deserved. One afternoon, Amanda was preparing a new set of property listings when she received an unexpected message. It was from Clint's assistant, asking if she could assist with a small project involving the landscaping and preservation of the property next to Clint's home. She hesitated for a moment, remembering the first day he had walked into her office and the lessons that had followed. Then she smiled softly to herself. This was another opportunity, she realized, to show what she had learned. When Clint arrived to discuss the project, he parked his truck at the edge of the property and walked slowly toward her. There was no fanfare, no rush. He greeted her simply. "Good afternoon." Amanda felt a little nervous, but she had grown over the past weeks. "Good afternoon, sir," she replied. "I'm happy to help in any way I can." They walked together along the edge of the property. Clint pointed out areas he wanted preserved: the wildflowers, the old trees, and the small stone path that led to the bluff. He spoke gently, but his words carried clarity and vision. "I want this place to stay natural," he explained. "No big changes, just care and respect for what's already here." People forget that sometimes. They see land and think only of profit or building. "I want peace." Amanda nodded, listening carefully. She realized this was more than just a landscaping project. It was a reflection of the man himself. Clint had always valued simplicity, authenticity, and patience. Even in Hollywood, he had carried these qualities quietly. They discussed small details: where a bench might go, which areas needed protection from erosion, how to guide workers without disturbing the natural flow. Amanda suggested ideas gently, not to impress him, but to ensure the work would match his vision. Clint listened thoughtfully, asking questions and offering feedback with calm precision. As the afternoon sun shifted toward evening, they stopped on a small hill overlooking the ocean. Clint stood quietly for a moment, breathing in the sea air. Amanda hesitated but finally spoke. "Mr. Eastwood," she said softly, "I just want to say thank you, not for the work or the project, but for the lessons you've given me these past weeks. You showed me what respect really means, and I'll never forget it." Clint looked at her with a small, approving smile. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You did the work yourself. I just reminded you of something you already had inside. People can teach you in many ways, but it's up to you to learn." Amanda felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't admiration for fame or power. It was gratitude for a human being showing her patience, understanding, and the quiet strength of character. Clint glanced at the horizon. The waves shimmered gold in the late light. "It's a beautiful day," he said quietly. "Sometimes you just have to take a moment to appreciate it. Not everything is about deadlines or schedules. Some things are about balance, about being present." Amanda nodded. She realized he was speaking about more than the property. It was about life itself. Every moment mattered, and the way she treated others mattered even more. Over the next few days, Amanda coordinated with the team who would take care of the property. She communicated clearly, listened carefully, and treated everyone involved with fairness. Clint visited occasionally to check progress, but he never imposed himself. He trusted her. Through these small interactions, Amanda noticed something else. Clint had a way of teaching without speaking directly. His actions, his calm presence, and the simple way he carried himself offered a model of integrity. It wasn't about fame or power. It was about quiet strength, patience, and respect. She realized that in her own life she had often rushed decisions, judged too quickly, and focused on appearances. Clint had reminded her that real influence comes from character, not status. One morning, Amanda arrived early at the office. The sun had just risen and the town was still quiet. She had prepared a small presentation for Clint to show the proposed changes for the property. As she reviewed her notes, her phone buzzed with a message from Clint's assistant, confirming he would arrive in about an hour. She took a deep breath and thought about the journey she had taken. From the moment she had misjudged him to now, she had learned patience, humility, and the value of listening. When Clint arrived, he greeted her with the same calm smile. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, sir," she replied, this time with confidence. "I've prepared the plans we discussed. I'd like your thoughts." He reviewed everything carefully, asking small questions and making minor suggestions. At no point did he criticize harshly or act impatiently. He simply guided the process, allowing her to lead where appropriate. By mid-afternoon, they walked along the property together, inspecting each area. The wind carried the scent of the ocean, and the sun's reflection on the waves cast a golden glow over the land. Clint paused near a cluster of wildflowers. "These," he said softly, "need to stay untouched. They're small, but they matter." Amanda smiled. "I understand," she said. "They'll be preserved." For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the waves and the distant cry of a seagull. Clint's calm presence filled the space, and Amanda realized that this simple lesson about care, patience, and respect was more valuable than any sale or commission she had ever earned. Weeks passed, and the project progressed smoothly. Amanda found herself reflecting on her own growth. She realized that respect and kindness were contagious, and small moments of humility could create lasting change. She no longer feared making mistakes because she had learned how to respond with honesty and integrity. Clint, meanwhile, continued to live quietly in his home. He spent mornings watching the ocean, afternoons checking on the property, and evenings reflecting on life's simple truths. The town had begun to notice his quiet presence. The man who had once been a legend on the screen now lived among them humbly, teaching lessons in subtle ways. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amanda walked along the edge of the property. The work was nearly complete, and everything looked as Clint had envisioned: natural, untouched, peaceful. She paused to watch the waves, feeling a sense of accomplishment and growth. Clint joined her, standing quietly beside her. They didn't speak at first, simply observing the beauty around them. After a moment, he spoke softly. "You've done well," he said. Amanda turned to him, surprised. "Thank you," she said. "But it was your guidance that made the difference." Clint shook his head. "You learned not because of me, but because you wanted to. That's what matters. People can offer lessons, but the choice to learn is yours." Amanda felt a warmth in her chest, a mix of gratitude, respect, and quiet pride. She realized that life's lessons often come from the simplest moments: an encounter, a conversation, a small act of patience. And sometimes the most profound teachers are the ones who don't shout or demand attention, but simply exist with honesty and integrity. As the sun disappeared beneath the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clint and Amanda stood quietly together. The ocean roared softly below, the wind rustled through the trees, and the world felt alive yet calm. Clint turned toward her and smiled,